The forest was silent except for the soft sound of leaves moving in the wind. An alien girl from the planet Valora walked carefully between the tall trees. Her silver eyes scanned the shadows. Searching for signs of life, she had studied this world from her ship for months. The humans here looked weak to her, slow, soft-skinned, easy to catch on Valora. They would have been prey, nothing more. She had landed on Earth only 2 days ago. Her mission was simple: watch them closely, learn their ways, and report back. But already, something felt strange. The forest seemed alive in a way she did not understand. Birds called in the distance, insects hummed, and far away she heard a deep growl. She tightened her grip on the scanner in her hand. Through the trees, she saw movement, a figure, tall and broad-shouldered, moving silently between the trunks. It was a human male, dressed in dark clothing. Carrying a long weapon, he moved like a shadow, slow but sure. Every step was quiet, every motion controlled. Lyra tilted her head, curious. He was not wandering. He was tracking something. She followed from a safe distance. Her feet made almost no sound, but she still worried he might hear her. The man stopped. Crouching low, he pressed his hand to the ground, studying the dirt as if it was speaking to him. Then he looked ahead and began to move again. Lyra's curiosity grew. She wanted to know what he was hunting. Suddenly, the forest sounds changed. The wind seemed to stop. The birds went quiet. A heavy feeling settled in the air. Lyra froze, sensing danger. From the shadows, a huge beast leaped forward, its teeth bared. It moved faster than anything she had seen on this planet. But before she could even react, the human turned. His weapon flashed. There was a sharp sound. The beast collapsed, motionless. Lyra's mouth fell open. The human didn't run from the predator. He killed it with one perfect strike. He stood over the body for a moment, then crouched down, checking it. His face showed no fear, only focus. He cleaned his weapon and continued walking. Lyra stayed. Hidden behind a tree, her heart pounding. Everything she thought she knew about humans started to shake on Valora. Prey ran from danger. Prey hid until the hunter was gone. But this man was not prey. He was the hunter. She began to follow him. Again, moving more carefully than before. The human's steps were silent, his eyes sharp. It was as if he could see things she could not. She watched him set small traps made from rope and sticks. She watched him blend into the shadows until he seemed to disappear. He was not simply surviving in this forest. He was controlling it. For hours, Lyra followed him. She saw him catch fish from a stream with nothing but a sharpened stick. She saw him stop to listen when the wind carried faint sounds. Every action had purpose. Every motion was calculated. It was not the way prey lived. It was the way a predator ruled its hunting ground. The sun began to set, painting the sky orange and gold. Lyra thought about returning to her ship, but something kept her there. She needed to understand. How could humans, a species she thought of as weak, move and act like this? She stepped closer to get a better look. A branch cracked under her foot. The sound was small, but in the silence of the forest, it felt loud. The human stopped moving. His head turned slowly, his eyes scanning the trees. Lyra held her breath for a moment. She thought he would ignore it and continue walking. Then he moved, not toward his original path, but toward her. Every step was silent, every motion deliberate. Lyra's heart began to race. She took a step back, then another, but it was too late. The man was standing just a few meters away, his weapon in his hand. He looked at her, his expression calm but unreadable. "You've been following me," he said, his voice low. It wasn't a question. It was a fact. Lyra tried to speak, to make up a reason, but the words caught in her throat. She could feel his gaze like sharp claws. It was not the look of prey meeting something dangerous. It was the look of a predator who had just found another creature in his territory. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. The shadows grew longer, the air colder. Lyra realized that she had made a mistake. This was not her hunt. This was his. Asterisk. The human did not lower his weapon. His eyes stayed locked on Lyra. They were not the eyes of someone surprised or afraid. They were the eyes of someone who had already decided what to do. Lyra had seen hunters on her homeworld, but this was different. His gaze was steady, sharp, and full of calculation. Finally, he turned slightly and gestured for her to follow. "Stay close," he said. It was not a request, it was an order. Lyra hesitated, but her instincts told her it was safer to obey. They began moving through the forest together. The man walked with the same quiet steps as before. Every few moments, his eyes flicked to the sides, scanning the trees. It was like he could see dangers before they even appeared. Lyra tried to match his movements. She stepped where he stepped. She copied the way he kept his body low and his eyes moving. But even then, she could not match his silence, somehow. He was always quieter, always more hidden. They reached a small clearing. The man stopped and crouched. Pointing to the ground, Lyra followed his gaze. There were deep claw marks in the dirt, fresh. The air carried a faint smell of something wild. "That's a night stalker," he said. Lyra's translator chip whispered the meaning in her ear. She had read about these creatures in her data files, fast, vicious, almost impossible to see. In the dark, her people considered them top predators, but the human's face showed no fear. Only focus. He began to circle the clearing, studying the ground. Every mark, every broken twig seemed to tell him a story. Lyra could not follow his logic. To her, it was just dirt and plants. To him, it was a map. Then she saw it, a shadow moving. At the edge of the trees, it was low, fast, and silent. Her breath caught before she could warn him. The human raised his weapon and aimed. The shadow froze. The man didn't fire. Instead, he stared into the darkness and waited. His stillness was more frightening than any roar. Minutes passed, finally. The shadow retreated into the forest. Only then did he relax. "That wasn't worth the fight tonight," he said calmly. Lyra was stunned on Velora. Hunters chased their prey until the end, but this man had chosen to let the predator live. Not out of mercy, but because he had judged the moment unnecessary. They moved on. The forest grew darker as night fell. Lyra noticed something strange. The man was not just hunting. He was building something, small traps, hidden tripwires, and markers carved into trees. She realized he was shaping the land itself, turning it into an extension of his will. At one point, they stopped near a fallen log. The man sat without speaking. He handed her a small pouch. Inside were strips of dried meat. Lyra hesitated before eating. The taste was strange but rich. "You can't track on an empty stomach," he said simply. His voice carried no emotion, but his words felt like another lesson. Lyra studied him in the dim light. The way he moved, the way he chose when to fight, and when to wait. She had come to watch prey, but what she saw now was a creature built for survival, not through speed or strength alone, but through patience, skill, and something far more dangerous, intelligence. As they rested, the night sounds returned. Owls called, insects hummed, and far away a predator howled. Lyra felt the weight of the human's gaze on her again. "You're not from here," he said. It was not a question. Lyra stayed silent, unsure how much he guessed, but deep inside, she knew one thing. This man saw more than her eyes could ever hide, and that, she realized, was the most dangerous thing of all. The night air was cool. The moonlight slipped through the branches, painting silver lines on the forest floor. Lyra followed the human in silence, her mind full of questions. She had been trained to study other species, but nothing in her training prepared her for him. They came to a narrow stream, the water whispering as it moved over the stones. The human knelt and dipped his hands into the cold water. He drank, then glanced at her. "Your turn," he said. Lyra crouched but didn't drink. Her body did not need water like his. Still, she pretended to sip so he would not suspect. When she looked up, she saw his eyes fixed on her, not on her movements, but on her, as if he could see past her skin. She felt exposed in a way she had never felt before. Valorans had studied thousands of species, but right now, she was the one being studied. "Why are you here?" he asked, his voice low. Lyra's mouth opened, but no answer came. He didn't push for a reply. Instead, he stood and began walking again. It was as if he already knew the truth, and that scared her more than if he had demanded answers. They moved deeper into the forest. The darkness pressed in around them. Somewhere close, a branch cracked. The human stopped. Raising one hand for her to stay still, Lyra froze, scanning the shadows. A faint growl rolled through the air. The sound was low, almost too low to hear. From the blackness between the trees, two glowing eyes appeared. The predator stepped into the moonlight. A night stalker, larger than she expected. It circled them slowly, its head low, its muscles ready to strike. Lyra reached for her weapon. But the human shook his head. "Not yet," he whispered. They stood still as the predator moved closer. Lyra's heart pounded. She had hunted before, but never like this. Never while standing still in the open. The human's breathing was calm. His hand rested loosely on his weapon. He was waiting. The night stalker lunged. In one smooth motion, the human moved to the side, his weapon flashing in the moonlight. The predator hit the ground hard, a sharp cry breaking the silence. It tried to rise, but the man was already there, finishing it with precision. The fight had lasted only seconds. Lyra stood frozen, unable to speak. He looked at her, his face unreadable. "That's why you don't move too soon," he said. His tone was not proud, not cruel. It was simply a fact. Then he began to drag the predator's body to the side. He worked in silence, skin glistening with sweat. Lyra realized her hands were trembling, not from fear of the predator, but from the quiet certainty that this man could have killed her just as easily. When he was done, he stood and faced her fully for the first time. His eyes were steady, his voice calm. "You've been watching me since yesterday," he said. Lyra swallowed hard. "Yes," she admitted softly. "And now you know," he replied, stepping closer. "We are not prey." The human walked ahead, not looking back. Lyra followed, her steps light but her mind heavy. She had faced dangerous creatures before, but none had looked at her the way he did. It wasn't the look of prey. It was the look of a hunter deciding whether to strike. They moved through the dark forest until the trees thinned. A cold mist curled along the ground, wrapping around their ankles. The man stopped at the edge of a rocky ridge. From there, the land fell into a deep valley. The wind carried strange sounds from below, growls, clicks, and something like whispering. "This is where they hunt at night," he said, his voice steady. "Stay close, and stay quiet." Lyra's eyes searched the shadows. She saw shapes moving far below, sleek bodies sliding between the rocks. Predators, dozens of them. Her instinct was to step back, to find cover. But the man began to descend the ridge. Without hesitation, Lyra swallowed her fear and followed. As they moved into the valley, the air grew thicker. The sounds around them grew sharper. Somewhere to the left, a pair of glowing eyes blinked. To the right, claws scraped over stone. Every nerve in Lyra's body told her to run. But the human walked as if he owned this place. His head turned slightly, his ears catching sounds she could not hear. They reached a narrow passage between two jagged rocks. The man crouched and pointed to the ground. Lyra saw nothing unusual, but then, from the shadows, a predator crept forward, its body low, its fangs glistening. Lyra tensed, ready to fire. The human raised one hand. "Wait." The predator moved closer, close enough that Lyra could see its breath in the cold air. Then it stopped, not because it feared her, but because it feared him. It gave a low growl, stepped back, and vanished into the darkness. Lyra's heart pounded. "How?" she whispered. The human's reply was calm, almost bored. "They can smell fear," he said. "And they can smell when there's none." They kept moving. The deeper they went, the more predators appeared. Some watched from the shadows, some followed at a distance. None attacked. Lyra realized this was the lesson. He wasn't teaching her to fight. He was teaching her to walk through the heart of danger without showing fear. Finally, they reached a small rise in the center of the valley. From there, could see the predators circling, not attacking, just watching. The man stood tall, scanning the land. "This is the difference," he said quietly. "Prey runs until it's caught. A predator chooses when to fight." The words sank into her mind like cold steel. This wasn't survival. It was dominance. Lyra looked at him and understood something that shook her. He wasn't trying to protect her. He was showing her what she would have to become if she wanted to survive here. The morning came cold and gray. Mist clung to the trees, and every leaf dripped with dew. Lyra awoke to find the human already gone. The campfire was still warm, but the ground beside it was empty. For a moment, she thought he had abandoned her. Then she saw it, a single footprint in the mud, leading away, and beside it, something else. A mark too deep and wide to be his. A predator's track, fresh. Her stomach tightened. He had left her, but not by accident. This was deliberate, a test. She picked up her weapon and began to move. The forest felt different without him. Every sound was sharper, every shadow heavier. Birds scattered at her approach. Somewhere ahead, a low growl echoed. She slowed her steps, forcing herself to remember what he had taught her. No rushing, no fear. Walk like you belong here. The tracks led to a fallen tree, its roots twisting into the air like claws. Lyra stepped around it and froze. The predator was there, massive. Its dark fur rippling over muscle, it lifted its head and stared at her. Its eyes were not curious, they were hungry. Her hands tightened on the weapon. The human's words whispered in her mind. "They can smell fear." She forced her breathing to slow. The predator began to circle. Each step was slow, deliberate. She turned with it, never showing her back. Suddenly, it lunged. Lyra fired. The blast striking its shoulder, it roared in pain. But instead of retreating, it came faster. She rolled to the side, the claws missing her by inches. Her heart hammered in her chest. She aimed again, this time for the throat. The shot hit. The beast staggered. Another step and it collapsed. The forest fell silent except for her breathing. She stood over the body, her hands shaking. The smell of blood filled the air. And then, from behind her, came the sound of slow footsteps. She turned to see the human standing there, watching, his expression unreadable. "You didn't run," he said, his voice carried no praise, only fact. "You fought." Lyra lowered her weapon. For the first time since meeting him, she felt a small spark of pride, not because she had killed the predator, but because she knew she had passed his test. The human stepped closer, glancing at the fallen beast. "Now," he said, "you might be ready for what's really hunting us." The forest was quiet after the kill, but it was not a peaceful quiet. It was the kind that made the skin tighten and the air feel heavy. The human stood beside Lyra, his eyes scanning the tree line. "They'll be here soon," he said. Lyra frowned. "More predators?" His head turned slightly. "Not the kind you think." They left the valley and moved toward higher ground. The human's pace was faster now. Every step was deliberate, but there was a tension in his shoulders she hadn't seen before. Lyra wanted to ask questions, but his silence told her this was not the time. When they reached a ridge, he stopped and crouched. "Look," he whispered. Lyra followed his gaze. Below, in a clearing, stood 3 tall figures. They were not beasts. They were not human. They wore armor of dark metal that seemed to drink in the light. Each carried a long weapon, sharp and alien. "They're hunters," the human said. "But they're not from here." Lyra's chest tightened. She recognized the design of their armor, not from Valora, but from the Outer Guilds, a coalition of worlds, known for hunting intelligent species for sport. "What are they doing here?" she asked. The human gave a humorless smile. "They think we're prey," as if to prove his point. One of the armored hunters knelt and touched the ground. Its head turned toward their ridge. "They're tracking," Lyra whispered. The human nodded. They already know we're here." He led her away from the ridge and into a dense stretch of trees. The air grew darker, the canopy thick overhead. Lyra could feel the change. This was no longer about beasts or survival. This was a hunt. And she and the human were the targets. They stopped in a shadowed hollow where the ground was soft. The human began to work quickly, setting traps from rope, sharpened stakes, and hidden pits. His hands moved with a speed born from experience. "This isn't the first time you've fought them," Lyra said. His jaw tightened. "No." He didn't elaborate, but the scar along his neck told her more than words could. A distant metallic sound rang through the trees. The hunters were moving closer. Lyra gripped her weapon, her pulse racing. The human glanced at her, his voice low. "This isn't like fighting predators," he said. "These think, they plan, they adapt." The first shadow moved between the trees ahead. Lyra raised her weapon, but the human shook his head. "Wait," he whispered. They stayed perfectly still as the figure drew nearer. The trap sprang. A rope snapped tight, lifting the armored hunter off the ground. It thrashed violently, but the man moved in with precision, ending the struggle in seconds. Lyra stared at the fallen body. "They bleed," she whispered. "The humans." Eyes met hers. "Everything bleeds," he said. "But not everything runs." The forest burned with noise, not fire, but the sound of battle. Snapping branches, shouts, and the sharp ring of metal on metal. Lyra ran behind the human as he weaved through the chaos. The two remaining armored hunters were closing in. Their movements fast and precise. They were not chasing blindly. They were herding, pushing them toward a kill zone. But the human wasn't running away. He was leading them. They broke into a clearing where the moonlight shone bright. It was the same valley she had seen on her first night. But now, traps lined the ground. Pits, spikes, and hidden snares waited. Under leaves, the human stopped in the center, standing tall. His voice carried across the open space. "Come on," he called. "No fear, no hesitation." The hunters entered the clearing, weapons ready. One aimed and fired. A flash of light ripped through the air. The human dove aside, the blast striking a hidden rope. A trap snapped, pulling one hunter into the air and slamming it against a tree. Before it could recover, he was already there, ending it with a swift strike. The last hunter hesitated. Lyra could almost feel the shift. The moment it realized this was not the hunt it thought it was. The man's eyes locked on it. Predator meeting predator. Then he moved, fast, silent, deadly. The fight lasted less than 10 seconds. When it was over, the clearing was still. Lyra stood frozen. The human walked past her without a word. Dragging the last hunter's weapon, she followed, her mind struggling to fit what she had seen into what she had always believed. Finally she spoke, her voice quiet. "They came for prey." The human glanced at her, his expression unreadable. "They found something else," he said. When they reached the ridge, Lyra looked back at the clearing. The traps, the bodies, the way the human had controlled every step of the fight. Her people had always believed humans were fragile. Easy to kill, easy to outthink. But tonight, she had seen the truth. Not just in his skill, but in his patience, his control, his refusal to be hunted. She whispered to herself, "They're not prey." Her eyes followed the human as he moved. Ahead of her, they're apex predators. And in that moment, she understood the danger. If humans ever decided to hunt her kind, nothing, no weapon, no army, no world, would be enough to stop them.